When you look at the conflicts in Ukraine and in Israel, what difference would you draw considering the way they're carrying out their battle against the enemy?
Well, I mean, first of all, when you compare Russia and Ukraine, you're dealing with two modern conventional armies, large armies that operate the entire spectrum of weaponry. Aircraft, tanks, infantry, anti-air defenses, and so it's literally the definition of conventional warfare, large scale conventional warfare. When you take a look at Hamas versus Israel, we're talking asymmetric warfare. We're talking a lightly armed insurgency, a guerrilla warfare type activity against a large conventional military. And so there's literally no comparison that can be made between the kind of fighting that's taking place in Ukraine and the kind of fighting that has taken place and will take place in Gaza between Israel and Hamas.
When you look at the response coming from the Netanyahu administration, they were talking about that we are going to attack Hamas. Did they get anything out of these bombing considering Hamas?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to take a look at, the conduct of this conflict so far. We start on October 7th and we see Hamas executing one of the most professional military operations imaginable. I'm not condoning the deaths of civilians. That's always, a tragic situation. But let's be honest, there's sufficient eyewitness account coming from Israeli sources that indicate that a significant number, perhaps even the majority of the Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by Israelis in a crossfire, the aggressive tactics used by the Israeli Defense Force, etc. Indeed, many of the people who participated in the outdoor concert, and over 260 of them were killed. It appears that a significant number of them may have been killed by Israeli gunfire, not Hamas gunfire. So, but you see the Israeli government tried to denigrate what Hamas did by saying it was a terrorist action, etc. No, it was a well-planned, well-executed military assault on Israel. And if Hamas is going to plan something to that level, and it, some people say, and I believe it took at least a year, maybe more, to plan this operation. You don't plan to begin something and not have an idea on how you want it to end. There was a reason Hamas started this fight. And I think the reason is clear, that they needed to break the paradigm of the Abraham Accord, the agreement that was signed during the Trump administration that normalized relations, or sought to normalize relations between Israel and the Arab world at the expense of Palestinian statehood. The conditions that were created within the Abraham Accord about Palestinian statehood meant that there was never going to be a Palestinian state. And as Israel was moving toward reconciliation with Saudi Arabia, I think Hamas recognized that if that happened, there would never be a Palestinian state, ever, that Israel wins. So what needed to be done was to initiate a military operation on the scope and scale of which it changed the entire paradigm in the Middle East. And this is what happened. But it's not just about the embarrassment that they inflicted on Israel on October 7th. It's what they want to happen next. Let's be clear. The Israeli crimes against Gaza were predictable, meaning we know what Israel's policy is regarding collective punishment. They've actually put it in writing, the Dahiwa policy, mowing the grass. Since 2006, it's been officially stated as the policy of the Israeli Defense Force. So everybody knew what Israel was going to do. You just needed to create the conditions that had Israel doing what it wanted to do on a massive scale. And so the Hamas attack was designed to humiliate Israel, and then compel Israel to do something big, not something small, not something medium, something big. And Israel has done that. And what they're doing right now is the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza, collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And the reason Hamas wanted this to happen, I'm being a little cynical here, but it had to happen. Just like in order for Martin Luther King to succeed in the civil rights movement in the South, he needed to be beaten by white police officers. He needed to be arrested. Atrocities needed to occur to shock the American public into saying something's wrong here. And so what Hamas did is humiliate Israel, and then Israel did what Hamas knew they were going to do: respond massively, respond collectively, punishing the Palestinian people. And what is occurring here is Israel's losing the public relations war, which is what Hamas wanted. When you commit an atrocity, the world normally lines up against you. But what's happening right now is that the biggest atrocity being committed is by Israel against the Palestinian people. And this was by design. Hamas also is challenging Israel to come and get them. And Hamas is prepared for this aspect of the fight. They have gone deep underground in a tunnel network that is fully equipped to survive for a lengthy period of time. And the tunnels are constructed in a manner which enhances the defensive qualities of Gaza, whether it's been bombed or not. Israel's bombing is not impacting Hamas at all. Yeah, one tunnel might collapse and kill 20 guys here. Another tunnel might be damaged here. But by and large, Hamas, the military capability of Hamas, is intact. The only people suffering from the bombing are the Palestinian people. And again, this was by design. The more Israel bombs the innocent population of Gaza, the more damage is done to the reputation of Israel.
It seems to me that they don't have any long-term strategy on their part by these attacks.
Israel or Hamas?
Israel.
Israel's only strategy is to survive.
That's the case. If they want to survive, they have to survive with all these Arab nations that's surrounding Israel. Because it seems that by these attackings, they are getting worse politically with these Arab nations, with Turkey, with other nations. It doesn't seem that they have a long-term strategy for surviving in that region.
Well, actually, they had a brilliant strategy for surviving in that region. And that was to diminish the possibility of Palestinian statehood. Again, I bring up the fact that had Hamas not attacked on October 7th, there was a good likelihood that Israel would have normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. And that's the grand strategy of Israel, and it was winning. Israel got the United States to support the Abraham's Accord, which eliminated a Palestinian state as a possibility. Yes, in writing, they say it could happen if this happened, this happened, this happened, but none of that's going to happen. Israel's guaranteeing it isn't going to happen. Israel's grand strategy was working. They were winning. The Palestinians were losing. Not anymore. And now what's happened is that Israel is desperately trying to get back on track, but they've lost the narrative. The narrative has been taken over by Hamas, who is successfully using Israel's genocidal behavior against the people of Palestine as a weapon against Israel. And as you mentioned, Turkish President Recep Erdogan has said that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Now, we know that Turkey never recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization, but he's coming out and saying that they are mujahideen, that they are resistance fighters, that they are working on the cause of God. This is a big deal. And because Turkey is giving voice to that which is believed throughout the Arab world. And the Israelis right now are holding on to a wing and a prayer that they can get things back to where they were pre-October 7th. They think that they can defeat Hamas, but they know they can't. Hamas is an ideology, and the ideology of resistance is being magnified 100-fold with every bomb that's dropped on Gaza. Rather than defeating Hamas, Israel is expanding Hamas. Hamas has taken over in Turkey. It's in the United States, in the streets. People are coming out in support of Hamas. People are starting to recognize Israel for what it is, because Israel no longer has the smooth-talking, well-educated con artists who would sell Israel as an extension of America, a democracy just like America, the same values as America. They're not even pretending that right now. They're putting forward generals and politicians who are saying things that if you eliminated the term Arab and Jew and replaced it with Jew and German, these speeches being given by Israeli is the same thing that Nazi Germans were saying in the 1930s and early 1940s, the exact same thing. And the world is seeing this. This is unfiltered. Israel is not like us. It is not a democracy that has as its principal reason for existence political Zionism, which allows Israel to behave as if they are the chosen few from God, exceptional people who have an inherent right to oppress those who get in the way of the creation of a greater Israel. I am an American, and in America, a fundamental principle is that all men, and now by extension, all women, are created equal. There is no supremacy attached to Christian, Muslim, or Jew, or atheist, or Buddhist, or any other religion out there. All people are human. All men are created equal. And yet Israel operates on the premise that Jews are superior, that Jews are the chosen ones, that Jews have a covenant with God to come to the Holy Land, and anything is allowed and tolerated if it fulfills that, to include the oppression of the Goyim. And that is a term that is being used more and more in Israel today. Goyim, that means, it literally means an animal, a subhuman. The Israelis treat anybody who's not in favor of a Zionist state as animals. You know who else speaks like that? Stepan Bandera and his Ukrainian nationalists are the same thing about the exceptionalism of Ukrainian nationalism and the subhuman status attached to Russians, to Poles, to Jews. But we weren't allowed to say this because you couldn't speak out against Israel like this. Right now, we don't have to say anything because Israel's actions speak for themselves. The world is seeing the reality of what Israel is, and the world is standing up. As we speak, the General Assembly is coming together. And I hope they're going to act in the spirit of 1956, when the Security Council was frozen over the issue of the Suez Canal, and the General Assembly, with America's blessing, came forward and impose its will on the international community, because the General Assembly has that power. And it is time for the General Assembly to take control of this situation and condemn Israel and punish Israel for the genocidal activities. You cannot have an Israeli ambassador in the United Nations criticizing the Secretary General of the United Nations for calling Israel out for what they are. If anybody's to be expelled from the United Nations, it is the Israeli ambassador and the nation of Israel. And if they're not careful, people like me who believe firmly that Israel has a right to exist and that Israel must be defended regardless of the criminal policies, you're going to lose me, Israel. And when you lose me, it's over for you. Because when I flip to the other side, everybody else is going to flip. Because I used to be a very close friend of Israel. I used to stand with Israel. I used to be on their side, and they have lost me.
It seems that Israelis are postponing their ground attack in the Gaza. Is that viable to go on the ground in Gaza? What's at stake for them?
I think we have to go back in history to answer this question, to the Battle of Stalingrad. Around October of 1942, before the Soviets had begun the operation to encircle Stalingrad, the Germans, the Sixth Army, was still pushing to try and get to capture all of the west bank of the Volga River. There was an area in Stalingrad, I think it was called the Barricades Factory, and it had been bombed into oblivion, into rubble. And the surviving Soviets had dug into that factory and were waiting. The Germans brought in specially trained units, sapper units, and combat engineer units that had the tactics, the equipment, the experience to carry this out. And these sappers were put in, we're talking thousands of them, were sent in, and they were slaughtered, immediately slaughtered, because it's the most dangerous kind of fight in the world. And the Germans who were being slaughtered were the most highly trained specialists in urban warfare that Germany had. Now we fast forward to Gaza, that's been bombed into oblivion. Again, let's understand that Hamas knows what they want to happen. Hamas has has prepared the battlefield. The battlefield is exactly what Hamas wants it to be. They have trained for this. They are ready for this. Israel, on the other hand, has mobilized 300,000 reservists who are not trained for this, who are not motivated for this. These are people who were pulled out of their soft civilian life and have been called in to engage in the deadliest form of combat known to man. Now, when you do urban warfare, especially in the modern environment, you have to wear full combat equipment. That we're talking 50, 60, 70 pounds, depending on what you're doing. If you've been a civilian and you've been sitting in an office eating donuts, drinking coffee, partying at night, all that, and now you're taken out of that life and you're told, here, put on this combat kit and you're going in, you're going to die. Because what's going to happen is you're going to run 100 meters, you're going to have a heart attack and die. And if you don't have a heart attack and die, you're going to be hyperventilating. You're going to forget your tactical common sense. And the Hamas fighter who has been training for this is going to pop up, pop 3 rounds in your head, pop down, disappear, and you're dead. Probably your other friends are dead too, because you're fat, no good, useless soldiers. That's the reality of the Israeli army today. They have a handful of units that have some capabilities, but they're not that great to begin with. The Israeli army just isn't that good. That's one of the things that happened on October 7th, is that Hamas proved that the Israeli army just isn't that good. They also proved that Israeli intelligence isn't that good. Now, to go to war in an urban environment, you need at least 2 things. You need a very good army. Israel doesn't have one. And you need really good intelligence about where the enemy is. They obviously don't know a damn thing about Hamas. If they did, this wouldn't have happened. They know nothing. They are literally blind. So they are not going to carry out an assault on Gaza, because they cannot carry out an assault on Gaza. They will be slaughtered if they carry out an assault on Gaza. And this is what the United States has stepped in and said, don't do it. And there's another reason why, because even if political figures, and remember, the politicians today that are sounding so brave and so fierce, they're the ones that created October 7th. It was their incompetence that created October 7th. The Israeli public doesn't trust them anymore, and they will be replaced, but they are desperate not to be replaced. That's one thing all politicians have in common, is they don't want to leave office. And so Netanyahu and his cabinet of right-wing fanatics do not want to be kicked out. So they are talking strong, and they are speaking of going into Gaza, and they may override the concerns of the military. And remember, the senior military officers are also fools, idiots who caused this problem. The chief of staff, the minister of defense, all of these bigwigs are incompetent. They are incompetent. They should be relieved. Some of them should be shot for what they've done or failed to do. But now they're talking tough because they're trying to save their reputations. And they're going to save their reputations by sacrificing thousands of Israeli soldiers who are not prepared for this battle. And here's the dangerous part, because frankly speaking, I don't care about fat Israeli reservists that go into Gaza. May they all die. That's a decision they made and their governments made. If they want to sacrifice themselves on that hill, so be it. Not my concern. But my problem is if they go in, because in Gaza will be civilians, and the Israelis have already said that they'll treat anything that moves as a Hamas supporter, and they will kill it. So the million women and children and men who are in Gaza, who have survived the bombings, will be slaughtered by the Israelis. Not Hamas, but the innocent Palestinians will be slaughtered. And this will be too much for Hezbollah and Iran to take, and they will intervene. And now we have a general war, and that's my problem. I care about that. I don't care anymore. I told you, I used to be a friend of Israel. I used to train side by side with the Israeli force, not train, operate. We weren't training. We were doing real world stuff with the Israeli forces. They were my friends, and I considered them to be my allies. Not anymore. I not only don't care about them, I want them to lose, because only by losing can we break the paradigm of control that they've had over the Middle East peace process. Because there is no Middle East peace. There has never been Middle East peace, and there will never be Middle East peace so long as there is political Zionism in place. Political Zionism must be defeated. It must be defeated politically, and it must be defeated militarily. And so I pray for Israel's defeat. Not the strategic defeat where everybody's killed, no. But I want Israel to recognize that they are not supermen. They are not exceptional. They are humans just like everybody else. That they bleed just like everybody else, There is no such thing as Israeli exceptionalism. I know they consider themselves to be God's chosen, but they're not. They're not. They're just like you and I. In fact, they're worse because they believe in their supremacy, but they don't have the ability to act on that. So I pray for Israel's defeat on the battlefield because we need them to be defeated so that we can change the dynamic that existed under the Abrams Accord, where Israel was ready to normalize relations with the Arab world and the Palestinian people were forgotten. Now the Palestinian people aren't forgotten. They're there. And we need them to get their own homeland. We need the Palestinian people to get their own state. And this is the time to do it. It can only happen with Israel losing. So I pray for Israel to be defeated. But I can't support Israeli action that enlarges this conflict, that brings down Hezbollah and Iran. Not because I'm concerned about Hezbollah and Iran killing Israeli soldiers, kill them all. And I hate to be this blunt about it, but Israel is on the wrong side of history right here. There's nothing good that can be said about Israel today. Listen to the statements of Israeli politicians and Israeli soldiers. These are hate-filled statements, statements where they call the Palestinians animals, and their actions that are derived from these statements are genocidal, literally the definition of genocide, and it's being ignored by the United States and the West. So we need the Israeli army to be destroyed, to be eliminated, to suffer a defeat. But it can't be done in a way that brings everybody else down. But that is the Israeli mindset, the Samson option, they call it. Now, that's normally attached to their nuclear deterrence, meaning that if it looks like Israel is going to be destroyed, that they will kill everybody with their nuclear weapons. But it's also just a mindset that says, if we can't live the way we want to live, we will bring everybody down with us, which tells you right off the bat that Israel is the greatest threat to peace and security in the world today. Israel, as it's currently manifested, the political Zionism of Israel is the single greatest threat to international peace and security, and it must be defeated. But that defeat has to be modulated, so to speak, by a desire for something after this fighting. This means that Israel must be allowed to exist. There must be a homeland for Jewish people in the homeland, in the Holy Land, where they can live in peace and security with their neighbors. But they live as equals. The day of Israeli exceptionalism is over. The day where America throws in billions of dollars to guarantee Israeli technological supremacy is over. Israel cannot be superior to any of its neighbors. It can be equal to its neighbors, and that's it. That's the future. And you know who we get to thank for making this possible? Hamas. Because if it weren't for what they did on October 7th, we'd be in a situation where Palestine was forgotten. The Palestinian people would never have a homeland.
How come the Israeli intelligence, which we know is one of the best, can be so blind about Hamas?
Well, let's first of all take a step back. Israeli Mossad, first of all, the problem of Hamas and its military capability is not the problem of Mossad. It's the problem of Amman, military intelligence. But both of those, when you bring them together, it's Israeli intelligence. And you said something interesting. We know they are the best in the world. They aren't the best in the world. Israel is a very small country with very limited capabilities, but they have created this propaganda machine of Mossad being the best. If you take a look at how Mossad acted after the Munich Olympics and their assassination program, it was incompetent. It was brutal. It wasn't smooth at all. Mossad tried to assassinate a Hamas leader in Amman, Jordan, by spraying a poison in his face, and they got caught. Two of them got arrested by the Jordanians, by the bodyguard, the guy who ran him down and put him on the ground. The other guys ran to the Israeli embassy and were cowering in fear, exposed. They're not good. They killed the wrong guy in Norway. They're not good. They're not good. We just have allowed them to create the perception that they are good. And the problem with that perception, again, I use a sports analogy. If we take two teams of equally qualified people, and the other team is convinced that this team is the best in the world, we're playing Mossad. Oh, God, they're so good. They already lost when they go on the field, because Mossad has convinced them that they're better. But if you just view Mossad as the incompetent pieces of manure that they are, intelligence is a tough business. And you know who fails in the intelligence business? Cocky people. people who think they know it all, people who think they are superior, people who take shortcuts, and everything about Israel is a shortcut because it's not done through hard work. It's done by saying, I'm a Jew, I'm Israeli, help me, cheat, do this, that, and the other thing. And what happens when you go up against an entity like Hamas, Hamas doesn't view the Israelis as superior because Hamas has successfully operated against the Israelis. They know the Israelis when they're at their best and they know them at their worst. And Hamas built a plan that dealt with the reality of Israel. And the reality of Israel is they're not very good. October 7th proved that, proved it in spades. Their intelligence service just isn't that good because the Jews are not a supreme race. They are not imbued with some sort of special Jewish power. They don't wake up in the morning, drink Jewish coffee, and become supermen. They're humans just like us, the same as us. They get tired, they take shortcuts, they make mistakes. And if they buy into the notion of Jewish racial or ethnic supremacy, then they are not going to be aware of the mistakes they're making because they believe that they're above it. The Israelis became complacent. Look at their military. You know, the first thing I learned in the Marine Corps is that in order to win, you have to be willing to wade in and kill people, physically kill them, terminate them. We practice with the bayonet. Nobody else practices with the bayonet anymore. We do. Why? Because it's about killing. It's about plunging steel into a body, twisting it, pulling it out, butt stroking, and going on. The physical act of terminating a life. The Israelis don't do that. Why? Because as I'm plunging a bayonet, the other person could be plunging a bayonet too. And I could take one in the chest. I could die. I have to be prepared for that reality. Israelis do not want to die. They are casualty averse. When they lose an Israeli soldier, that is a strategic defeat for the nation. They mourn. So they have built a way of war that avoids closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower maneuver. They have allowed technology to take over. They have allowed an over-reliance on aircraft, on missiles, on standoff weapons. The entire wall around Gaza, it was a wall designed to keep Hamas in, to prevent them from coming through tunnels. The wall was built to detect tunnels coming under. That's the Israeli mindset. Remote control cannons operated from a control booth where some 18 to 19-year-old girl sat there and drank tea and ate a donut and manipulated a computer, playing a computer game, because that's what it was to her. An image on a screen, a cursor, and shooting rounds. Bam, 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 bam. But what happened? Boom. When the drone took it out. Now what are you going to do, honey? Now what are you going to do? Because you can't see anything. So you're sitting there, sipping your coffee, eating your donut. Hamas is closing in. They're taking out your sensors because they've planned it. They're not lazy. They know what they need to do. They come in, they knock on the door, take it down, and now you're dead because you didn't prepare for it. You're not standing up. You haven't fixed bayonets. You're not charging the door. You're not ready to die. You're scared. You're cowering. That's what happened to the vast majority of the Israeli forces on October 7th. They were scared. They were cowering. And if they go into Gaza, it's going to be 100,000 scared, cowering boys and girls who aren't ready for this fight because Israel isn't that good. And we need to make sure that everybody in the world knows this because Israel's been fooling everybody.
When we look at the US foreign policy, considering Ukraine and now in Israel, if you remember when the war in Ukraine started, Putin was willing to negotiate with the West, with the Zelensky administration. But at that time, the US was talking about, no, we are not negotiating with Putin because that would benefit Russia. All along this 18, 19 months that we have this war in Ukraine, they were not willing to negotiate with Russia. Right now, 2 resolutions have been proposed at the UN by Russia and Brazil, both of them for ceasefire. Both of them were vetoed by the US. What's the strategy? How do you see the US foreign policy? It seems that it's not seeking any peace. It's just getting worse.
You keep using the term strategy. Stop using that term because strategy implies that you've actually sat down and you've thought through the entire process to a discernible and achievable end game that you want to get from here to there. The U.S. doesn't do strategy. The U.S. does reactive tactics and operations. And right now, we have a policy that says support Israel blindly without any exceptions, that anything that goes forward that is deemed to be negative to Israel, we must veto, etc. It's just blind. There is no strategy. There is no thought process here. There's nobody in Washington, D.C. saying, hey, maybe a ceasefire would be a good thing, because if you say that, you're fired. Because the moment you say ceasefire, they'll say you're pro-Hamas. You're taking the Hamas position. Hamas wants a ceasefire. Hamas wants this. No, a ceasefire is actually the thing that humans look for, because we're looking for a termination of the dealing of death that's harming innocent civilians. Again, with all the people that say Hamas wants a ceasefire, that just proves how stupid they are. And it's time. I mean, it's time that we have to be honest with our language. You know, it's not a time to treat people with respect anymore, because people are dying in large numbers. So when I say stupid, I mean it with the bottom of my heart. Anybody who says that a ceasefire benefits Hamas is stupid, because Hamas planned this operation to go on for 80 or 90 days without a ceasefire. Actually, continuing the war benefits Hamas, you stupid people, because Hamas knows that the more you bomb the Palestinians, the more they suffer, the more Israel loses. It's strengthening Hamas abroad. Why do you think there's people in the streets all throughout the world rising up in favor of the Palestinian people? Because there isn't a ceasefire. If you want the demonstrations to stop, put in a ceasefire, and all those peaceniks will do what peaceniks do all the time. Oh, it's a ceasefire, and they'll go home. And then you can quietly do what you've done all along, lead the Palestinians down the primrose path of betrayal, pretending that you care for them, that you don't. If you want to end this thing now, put in a ceasefire and pour in humanitarian goods. Be seen as helping the people of Palestine, because what you're doing right there is breaking everything that Hamas wanted to happen. Because what you're doing is you're disenfranchised. Now, if Hamas takes action, they become the bad guys. They become the terrorists. Right now, Hamas is the noble resistor. And every day that Israel goes on doing what they're doing, they make Hamas appear more noble. The best way to get rid of Hamas, and Israel, if you're listening to me, please listen. Stop bombing now. Call for an immediate ceasefire. Send in every bit of humanitarian good you can. Send in all the gasoline. Send in all the food. Send in everything they need. Send in Israeli doctors, although they won't take them. But send everybody in there and say, we're ready to negotiate, and don't use an intermediary. No, Israel, be men about this. Say, we want to negotiate directly with Hamas about prisoner release. Hamas, we're at the table right now. We'll do it in Cairo. We'll do it at Qatar. We'll do it in neutral zone. But Hamas, you must come to us and you must talk to us about this release. We will not use middlemen. And Hamas is going to sit there and go, we can't do that, because that legitimizes Israel. And now Hamas, you've just outflanked Hamas. The way you defeat Hamas is politically, not militarily. You defeat them politically by giving them the opportunity to do the right thing, then watch them not. So now when somebody steps in to resolve this issue of the prisoners, it will be because Hamas failed, not because Israel failed. Make Hamas fail. Expose Hamas for what you claim they are, to see if Hamas is truly this degenerate group of terrorists who don't want peace. Give Hamas a chance to prove what you claim they are. But what you're doing right now is just proving the point that Hamas is the noble resistance. This is how stupid the Israelis are. This is how stupid America is. I just gave you the winning formula. And it's a formula that was told to me by an Israeli back in 1998, when he talked about the problem with Hamas, because Hamas was a problem back then, how to defeat Hamas. He said the best way to defeat Hamas would be for us to negotiate directly with Hamas, because Hamas won't know what to do. But they wouldn't do that, because you don't negotiate with terrorists. That's stupid. Israel's losing right now. America's losing. I happen to think this is good. I'm glad Hamas is winning. But if someone were to advise me and say, how do we beat Hamas? I just told you how to beat Hamas. Hamas will lose that fight, because Hamas is not ready for that fight. Remember, in combat, the most important thing is to get inside the enemy's decision-making cycle. It's called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. Fighter pilots use it, and the Marines will use it for ground combat, but it's useful in every scenario. Right now, Hamas is making Israel react to Hamas. Hamas is in control of the decision-making cycle. You want to beat Hamas? Flip the script. Make Hamas react to you. Do the unexpected. That's how fighter pilots win, and that's how Hamas can be defeated. Make Hamas react to you. Not militarily, because they're ready for this. Hamas has been training for this fight. Hamas is prepared spiritually for the loss of thousands of lives because they recognize through the sacrifice of the Palestinian people, that's the only path they can take to get a Palestinian homeland. Israel can win this thing today by calling for a ceasefire and by allowing every piece of humanitarian good possible to flow in, and then say, we want to negotiate directly with Hamas about the prisoner release. Game, set, match. Israel just won. It's over for Hamas. But Israel's not capable of doing that.
When Bernie Sanders was running against Hillary, he was anti-war, he was pro-peace. Since this war in Ukraine started, we see a totally different manner of Bernie Sanders. This is the left part. This is the people to the left in Democratic Party. He was totally supporting sending more weapons and funds to Ukraine. Right now, just yesterday, he tweeted that he's asking for a humanitarian pause in Gaza, but he's not asking for ceasefire. What is happening to these people who were once against wars, advocating for peace?
Bernie Sanders has never been against war. Bernie Sanders is not a member of the anti-war coalition. Bernie Sanders is a walking, talking hypocrite. Bernie Sanders is only against war when it's to his political benefit. He's against the wars of the Republican Party. He's against the wars that the Republicans got us into. He was against the war in Iraq, the occupation of Syria, etc. But was he against the occupation of Syria? It'd be interesting to find out Bernie Sanders' voting record when it came to supporting the Syrian opposition to Bashar al-Assad. I think you'll find that he was for that war. See, Bernie Sanders is a warmonger. The Democratic Party is a warmongering party. They exist, they pray for war. They believe that wars can be good as long as the wars don't politically benefit their political opponents. So if it's a Republican war, Bernie will pretend to be anti-war, but his true colors have been exposed. And everybody, when they say Bernie Sanders' name, spit, because that's what he deserves. He doesn't deserve any respect. He's a disgusting Zionist. He supports Israel without any, there's no limit to his support. If you're not screaming from the top of your lungs in protest for the slaughter of the Palestinian people today, then you are a Zionist. If you are not demanding the termination of this conflict, if you are not saying not one more dollar to Israel, no more weapons to Israel, then you are a warmongering Zionist. You are the worst kind of person. Because if you claim to be somebody who is pro-Jewish, and I'm not against being pro-Jewish. Again, my approach in life is I'm pro-people. I don't care what your religion is. If you're Jewish, I support your right to practice your religion any way you see fit, so long as the practice that you choose does not put others at risk. For instance, Zionism can't say we turn here at the expense of Palestinian people. I won't support that. But I do believe that Jews should have access to the Holy Land, should be able to live in the Holy Land and live their lives and worship their God side by side with Muslims and Christians. That's an easy thing. But if you claim to be pro-Jewish, saying the Jews were persecuted over history, and they were, there's no doubt about that, the pogroms in Russia and Ukraine, in Europe, the murder of the millions of Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, the Shoah, as they call it, all real. And if this is your thing, that never again will it happen, and I happen to agree with that, never again should the Jewish people be subjected to this kind of persecution. You need to understand that by supporting political Zionism, you are only guaranteeing that it will happen again. Because one of the key aspects of viewing someone as human is that they have to behave as human. They have to behave in a way that you recognize their humanity. But right now, Israel is shed its humanity. I love dogs. Anybody who has seen my podcast knows that I have 3 dogs, one of whom is a very vocal dog named Maverick. And if you criticize Maverick, I don't tolerate it very well because I love dogs. Dogs get rabies. And if a dog has rabies and he's roaming the street, it doesn't matter how much I love that dog must be killed because that dog is a threat to the dogs I love, to the people I love, to the community I love. It must be killed. Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird is a peace-loving man. But when a rabid dog was in the street, he took the rifle, he took the aim, he took the shot, he killed the dog. The Atticus Finch principle is when there is a rabid dog amongst us, that dog must be killed. Political Zionism is a rabid dog to humanity today, and it must be killed. Now, the best way to kill political Zionism is to attack it as an ideology, to expose it as a disgusting, decrepit ideology similar to Banderism, similar to the Nazi ideology of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. Blind violence, desire to inflict harm on somebody, it's just as evil as the people doing it. I call it Atticus Finch because it was selectively applied. But how many people are Atticus Finch? How many people are lawyers able to segregate? Hatred infects everybody. And what the Zionists are doing is encouraging people who otherwise would be more than happy to live in peace and harmony with the Jewish community of the world. They're encouraging them to identify Judaism with Zionism, make no distinction, and hold them all to account. And if you're Israeli, if you're Jewish, you should say never again. But never again means you can't empower those people to do this. And it's not just because people hate Jews. It's anything, any group of people that behaves in a manner that threatens the community at large will be singled out and will be attacked. If you believe in never again shall Jewish people be prosecuted, then you cannot support Zionist Israel the way it exists today. It's not supportable. And the best way to prevent the violence is to stop that ideology. I call it out as what it is and discourage people from embracing it, and get people instead to view the Jewish homeland in the Middle East as something positive, something that aspires to be what people thought it would be, living side by side in peace with their Palestinian neighbors, with Muslims, with Christians as equals. People bought into that except for the Zionists. They always knew that was a lie. And from the moment Israel was born, it was a lie. It was never designed to live in peace and harmony with its neighbors. It was always designed to steal the land, to oppress people, to evict people, to elevate Jews as the God's chosen, the superior, with a covenant to conquer greater Israel. Those days are over. And if you're Jewish and you want to buy into that and continue to support that, don't be surprised when never again becomes it's happening right now.
What you've seen from Europe, you've seen that they were totally unified against Russia. Right now, we can see some sort of division considering what's happening in Israel. How do you see the position of Europe right now, considering what's going on in Israel?
Well, first of all, when we say Europe, what is Europe? What is Europe? We keep using that term out there. The European Union, the European Commission. Europe used to be a collection of nations in a continent called Europe, but you had Spaniards, you had Portuguese, you had French, you had Italians, you had British, you had Germans, you had Dutch, you had Danes. So when you said European, people would say, well, but where in Europe are you from? But what's happened is they've with this European Union, they've tried to create just a European approach, a singular approach. And that was never going to work, because no matter how much you slice and dice it, a Spaniard ain't a German, never will be. An Italian ain't an Irishman, never will be. They will always retain this national identity. But Europe has, weakened itself by diminishing the national identity in favor of this thing called the unified European position. That might work when everything is coming up roses. The euro's doing well, you're in peace, the economy's doing well, so you begin this internal migration so that wherever you're born in Europe, you have a right to work over there. So if I'm born in Sicily, I can work in Poland. If I'm born in Poland, I can work in London, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't work when you start to hit it with adversity, when the economy start to collapse, because what's going to happen is people are going to look around and say, hey, we are in tough times. I want to support people that look like me, talk like me, act like me. I'm Italian. I want to support Italians. I'm not happy with what's happening here. If you're in Poland, I'm a Pole. I want to support Poles. I'm not happy with. And suddenly you start to see the reemergence of national identity. And that's the death of the European Union. What we see right now with what's going on with Russia is the death of the European union, the death of this fiction of European unity. Because as Europe is subjected to stresses, as adverse conditions fall in, people will do what people always do. The tribe closes around the tribe. And that's what nations tend to do, fall in on themselves, turtle up, take care of themselves. And I think we're going to see Europe fall apart. And you said they, again, when people say, they, because of their position about Russia, in order to have a position on Russia, you have to understand Russia. I will tell you right now that Borrell knows nothing about Russia. Van der Leyen knows nothing about Russia. Macron knows nothing about Russia. Scholz knows nothing about Russia. There are no Russian experts in Europe today. There's a bunch of amateurs that run around with this this fictional narrative about the evil Vladimir Putin and the reemergence of Russian imperialism trying to recapture the spirit of the Soviet. If anybody says that, again, I'd say it's time that we stop mincing words. They're idiots. They're stupid. It's stupidity because they are ignorant about the reality of Russia. That doesn't mean that you don't talk about Vladimir Putin. He is the leader. He is the leader that's been the leader for more than 2 decades. So you must speak about Vladimir Putin because he has transformed Russia. And if you're going to talk about Russia, you have to talk about Russia that has been that has been built by Vladimir Putin. But it's not just one man. It's a system. There is a bureaucracy. There are institutions in Russia that all work together and in a collaborative fashion to produce this thing called Russia. And if you're not dealing with that reality, again, if you don't define a problem, how can you solve the problem? If I look at you and I say you're the problem, but I define you as a robot made out of concrete, and so now my solution is that I'm going to look to disengage your electricity and weaken your mortar. Wait a minute, you're flesh and blood and a human. I mean, everything I just said isn't going to impact you because I haven't defined you properly. If you don't define the problem, any solution you come up with solves nothing because you're not solving the problem at hand. Europe doesn't know how to define Russia. So any European policies that have been put forward, from sanctions everywhere, will fail. And they were doomed to fail from the start. And this failure of those policies, combined with the adverse reactions because of these policies, sanctions boomeranging back on Europe, the high energy costs destroying the European economy, deindustrializing Europe, Germany. Now you have this adversity sinking in. So the ignorance of not knowing the problem has created the conditions where adversity comes in and Europe will fall apart. And that's what's happening right now.
Before this conflict in Israel started, we heard that the Republican Party, specifically the Republican Party, was talking about that Ukraine is dead. Let's focus on Taiwan. Right now, we have a new battle in Israel. Is Ukraine going to fade away in the U.S. foreign policy? Or as Janet Yellen said, that the U.S. economy is doing great and we can support 2 wars?
Well, let's just be honest. We weren't supporting one war, the war in Ukraine. How were we supporting it? Ukraine was losing. Ukraine has always been losing. By supporting it, I mean, if Janet wants to say that we can continue policies that result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands additional Ukrainian troops, yes, Janet, I agree. If Janet wants to say that we can have policies that send aircraft to Ukraine only to see them shot down in large numbers, yes, Janet, I agree. If you want a policy that will see Russia continuing to destroy Ukrainian air defense and Ukrainian infrastructure, yes, Janet, I agree. We can do this, Janet, because we're doing it. So you're good to go, Janet. Now, you want to support a war in Israel, too. Great. What war are you supporting, Janet? The continued humiliation of the Israeli armed forces, the continuing empowerment of Hamas by giving Israel the ability to slaughter innocent, defenseless Palestinians. Yes, Janet, we can do that. But, Janet, you know what? In the military, we don't want to just fight wars. We want to win wars. And the best way to win a war is not to fight it. The best way to win a war is to avoid conflict, to seek diplomatic outlet. And that's where she lacks imagination. Because the stupidity, and again, I'm sorry, my wife gets very mad at me when I use these words, but it's time just to drop all pretense. If I don't call you stupid when you are stupid, then somehow you'll think that I respect you. I don't respect Janet Yellen because she's an idiot. She's stupid. And one of the reasons why she's stupid is that her words lead to policies that lead to dead people, dead innocent people, lots of them in Ukraine, in Palestine, and in Israel as well. We can continue. We can fight 2 wars. There's no doubt about that. But we have proven we can't win one war. And now we're throwing in another one. We're not going to win it. She's not talking about victory because she doesn't know what victory looks like. She can't define victory. What we need Janet to say is, what we need to do is take a step back and bring about a termination of the conflict and see if there's a way that we can peacefully achieve the goals and objectives they want. Because a pro tip to Janet, right now, if the war in Ukraine was to end, Ukraine is going to lose 20% of its territory. Their economy is devastated, hundreds of thousands of dead. But had Janet Yellen supported diplomacy, say in March 26th of last year, and said, instead of saying, hey, let's sabotage the peace agreement that Russia has negotiated with Ukraine, and instead say, let's support it. Let me tell you what it would look like today. Kherson would be Ukrainian. Zaporizhia would be Ukrainian. The Donbass would be going through a referendum to determine where they were going to be. 500,000 Ukrainian men would be alive today. Trillions of dollars of infrastructure would be undamaged. Children, millions of them, would be at home with their families getting educated. And instead of focusing on how to join NATO, Ukraine would be focusing on how to better get involved with the European Union or with Russia or the international economy. They'd be thinking these things. Now, imagine what I just said. Kherson, Ukrainian, Zaporizhia, Ukrainian, Donbass going through a referendum. If someone told me that was the objective of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, well, I just told you could have achieved it through diplomacy over a year and a half ago. Do you see the futility of war? Do you see how stupid it is? Do you see why we should never allow people who don't know anything about war to talk about war? Janet Yellen should be supporting peaceful diplomatic outcomes and she is supposed to be about the economy. Does she not understand this war has destroyed Ukraine's economy? Europe's economy is hurting America's economy. Had we made peace back in March, imagine the trillions of dollars that would have been reallocated into more positive outcomes and the economic benefit that would have been accrued from that. That's what a true economic genius thinks of. She's not an economic genius. She proved it with her words, and she doesn't know a damn thing about the military. She's just an idiot, a fool. She's stupid. We don't need to listen to her anymore. We need to call her out for what she is. We need to call out everybody for what they are when they articulate policies that promote war over peace.
The former advisor to the Zelensky's office just said the Russian army will take Avdiivka, and that could be the end for the whole system of war against Russia that could bring down everything. How do you see the battlefield right now in Ukraine? The Ukrainian were talking about that Russian are using mixed tactics against Ukrainian. How does it look like right now?
I don't know what a mixed tactic is. I know that the Russians are winning. The Russians have adapted to the realities of the battlefield. That Russia has an operational methodology that plays to its strengths and designs to exploit Ukraine's weaknesses. And remember, war is an extension of politics by other means, meaning that if you understand the political motivations of your opponent and how to transform those motivations into behavior on the battlefield that's predictable, you can control the battlefield. So Russia has mastered the art of Zelensky. They know what makes him tick. And you've seen this over and over again. Look at, and we saw that the Russia learned this in Mariupol, for the Battle of Mariupol, the desperation that Zelensky had to recapture Mariupol. Instead of doing the smart thing, which is to withdraw your troops from an indefensible position, preserve your manpower, and then reposition yourself so that you can defend and stop the Russian advance, maybe bleed the Russians down to launch a counterattack that can take Mariupol. Instead, they sacrifice tens of thousands of troops because at that time they were on the assumption that there was a bottomless pit of manpower to draw upon. I don't think anybody at the time of Mariupol was thinking 500,000 dead Ukrainians in 600 days from that date. But the Russians learned from that. Remember, Russia started this without the depth of knowledge that they currently possess. So Mariupol took place. Now they came to Bakhmut. And what they saw in Bakhmut is Zelensky once again committed to holding on to a piece of land that makes no sense to hold on to sacrifice 70,000 soldiers to defend this. And the Russians went, wait a minute, we got this. And now, unlike Mariupol, where they surrounded the city, the Russians realized that we don't want to surround. What we want to do is get a dominating position so we control the lines of communication in and out with fire, so that if they retreat, we can hit them. If they come in, we can hit them. But we've created an escape valve that creates uncertainty in the minds of the defender. Once you shut that door shut over them, the defenders become desperate. They will now fight with 10 times the strength that they had before, because it's an act of desperation, and they will be moving desperately to break free. Meanwhile, while you're trying to hold them back, there's Ukrainians behind you who are attacking. You've now put yourself in a very disadvantaged in a disadvantaged position. So you keep it open. You compel the Ukrainians to consider either withdrawing or reinforcing it, because you're in the mind of Zelensky. You know what he's going to do: reinforce, 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 and then you just turn on the garbage disposal and you chew up all the meat that he throws in there. They did that in Bakhmut. They won. In the in this counteroffensive that's going on right now at Robotyno and Verbovoy and others, again, they created a sort of a mini cauldron and just let the Ukrainians come in, and they destroyed the Ukrainian strategic reserves. At Advika right now, the same thing is happening. The Russians have threatened the cauldron. They've created a cauldron, but now they're not going to shut the door. What they're doing right now is putting the Ukrainians between the horns of a dilemma. Do we hold on to this piece of territory, which Zelensky is saying to do so, or do we withdraw and consolidate, which he's not allowing to happen? So the last reserves that Ukraine has, and it's not reserves, they've eaten up their reserves. Ukraine now is taking troops from other parts of the battlefield, bringing them in to the garbage disposal and getting ground up by the Russians. And while this is happening, there's a similar cauldron taking place in Kupiansk up north. But the Kupiansk one it's a little bit more sophisticated, because there's a river barrier there that plays a role in this. But the Ukrainians are the same thing. Instead of realizing the indefensibility of their position to the east of the river, they're going to hold on to this land and try to reinforce, and they're getting slaughtered. If they withdraw, consolidate defense, then they might be able to bring more troops in to help in Advika, but they probably take them down to Robotyno and continue to beat themselves to death. The Russians have created a system of battlefield management that takes advantages of the political predisposition of Zelensky not to give up any territory. You see, because he has made it his political posture that not only is he going to reclaim all of the territory that was captured, he's not going to yield any more territory. And so the Russians have built a system of war to do this. Russia, at this point in time, has strategically defeated Ukraine. I predicted this last spring. I said the strategic defeat of the Ukrainian army will occur by late summer, early fall. It is early fall. The Ukrainian army has been strategically defeated. That doesn't mean that the war is over. At the end of the Battle of Kursk, where the Soviets strategically defeated the Germans, you still had, 2.5 years of fighting, or 1.5 years of fighting left, heavy fighting. When the Americans strategically defeated the Germans on the Western Front by crossing the Rhine River, the last 5 weeks of war of World War II for the Americans in Western Europe were the bloodiest 5 weeks of the war. We lost more men in the last 5 weeks because the Germans fought like hell, even though they were strategically defeated. So the Ukrainians will fight like hell. The Russians will lose more men, but the Ukrainians are going to lose even more. They have lost. They have lost the initiative. It's all over for them. They will lose. This war is over, except for the dying, the shouting, the screaming, the pain, the suffering. But Ukraine has no chance of recovering from this. It is over. Game, set, match, Russia.
Netanyahu had good relation with Putin before the conflict in Ukraine started. And we've seen that Israel got involved in this process of supporting Ukraine against Russia. What could have changed if there were no supporting for the Ukraine war on the part of Israelis? Is that a huge miscalculation on the part of Israelis, or they were forced by the U.S. foreign policy to do that?
First of all, let's understand that Vladimir Putin doesn't have good relations with anybody as the president of Russia. Vladimir Putin's job is to look out for Russia, Russian interests. So he's not your friend. He's not your best buddy. He's not your drinking pal. You are a representative of a nation that Russia has relations with. And so Vladimir Putin, as the head of Russia, will work in a manner which gets Russia the best benefit out of this. But unlike the United States, which claims to be the friend of Netanyahu, claims to be the friend of Israel, Russia is the friend of Russia and Russia alone. And so the reason why I bring that up is that Russia's never had blinders on about Israel. They're very aware of what Israel is, who Israel is. They know that Benjamin Netanyahu is a corrupt politician who has lied, cheated his way into power. He cannot be trusted. But does that mean that you turn your back on them? No, those are the people you have to get closer to. Those are the people that you have to bring in close so you know what they're doing, so you can think about what they're doing. Was Russia surprised by Israel's action vis-a-vis Ukraine? No, Russia's very realistic. They understand, the fact that the 600 to 900,000 Jews that fled the Soviet Union and took up residence in Israel, they may have family in Russia and all that, but they link Russia with the Soviet Union. They are anti-Soviet, and they are very much anti-Russian because they view the Russian people as anti-Semitic. They say that the Russian people were the ones who were oppressing them, not the communists, but the Russians. And so there's a tremendous amount of hostility towards Russia amongst the people that live in Israel today. And it only made sense that they would align themselves with Ukraine because that's their natural tendency. Plus, Zelensky is a Jewish president. And Jews look out for Jews. That's the way of the world, especially if you're a Zionist. I know I'm going to get in trouble for that statement. There's going to be people that say that, no, we don't do. Yes, but you're different. But if you're a Zionist, it's all about the empowerment of the international Jewry. And wherever a Jew is, you will seek to align because that's what empowers you. That's what you feed off of that. Zionism needs the international Jewry to believe in the cause of restoring greater Israel. And so there's this whole game going on there, and Russia knew about it. They weren't taken by surprise, but Russia is smart. Russia has military forces in Syria. Those forces are there to prop up the government of Bashar al-Assad, with whom Russia has very good relations. But Russia also knows that Israel is concerned about what's going on in Syria. This is why Russia will stand aside and do nothing while Israel bombs targets in Syria that are linked to Iran's presence in Syria. The Russians know that if they engaged in open hostilities with Israel, that their troops in Syria would be put at risk, and they don't want to do that. So it's a complicated dance that's taking place between Russia and Israel, but it's a dance that Russia is very much in control of. None of this took Russia by surprise.
It seems that Israelis are serious to go to attack on the ground in the Gaza Strip. If they're going in, do you see any threat from the north that comes from Hezbollah?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that Israel has mobilized 360,000 reservists. 300,000 of them are engaged on the Gaza front. They're not engaged in combat, but they're there. Israel knows that if Hezbollah comes in, the majority of those troops will have to be diverted up north to deal with Hezbollah. So right off the bat, Israel is not going to do anything that decisively commits 300,000 troops to Gaza because that's committing suicide. That means now they can't respond to a Hezbollah incursion. The last thing Israel wants at this point in time is a Hezbollah incursion. You have an American military delegation led by a Marine general, commander of Marine Special Operations Forces, who is advising them about the difficulties of urban warfare and cautioning them not to engage in, to initiate conflict that they don't have a guaranteed outcome. They don't want Israel to repeat the mistake of the Germans in the Barakati factory in Stalingrad, where they send troops in only to have them defeated and don't have a follow-on plan. Israel doesn't have large numbers of specially trained troops to carry out urban warfare. Israel doesn't have the required troops that are capable of dealing with the Hamas tunnels. Remember, Israel was humiliated on October 7th. Do not believe that in a span of 2 weeks, Israel has suddenly rediscovered the art of war, and they are now the most competent people on the face of the earth. The same people who failed Israel on October 7th are still in charge today. The same military that was defeated by Hamas is the military that exists today. There's no difference between them. Israel will not, I believe, get involved in large-scale ground combat in Gaza because they can't do it. They don't have the ability to do it. And if they did do that, they would open up a northern front against Hezbollah that could lead to the strategic defeat of Israel. So I think what Israel is going to be doing is carrying out a series of raids similar to the one they carried out last night, a battalion-sized force going in on limited duration with limited objectives. And these raids have primarily they're done for domestic political consumption, meaning to show the Israeli people that something is being done. But what happened last night? Nothing. Nothing happened last night. Israel went in, threw up some dust, threw around some stones, hit a couple spots, and then left. Hamas wasn't impacted by that at all. Israel will repeat this. And as they repeat, they'll be slowly probing in more and more until eventually they're going to get to where Hamas wants them. And then there's going to be a shutting the door, lots of casualties, Israel withdraw, and they will continue this process until which time international outrage over the continued bombardment of the innocent Palestinian civilians of Gaza leads to a rupture in international opinion about Israel, and Israel will be compelled to cease its operations and seek a ceasefire. But this time, the ceasefire will be because Israel lost. Israel was defeated. Again, I come back to my formula. Right now, where Israel is perceived as being in the driver's seat, perceived as being the strength, Israel can win this war today by calling a ceasefire, bringing the humanitarian gear, and demanding face-to-face negotiations with Hamas. But if Israel initiates a ground incursion and fails to accomplish its mission, it will be in a much weaker position at that point than they currently are right now. Right now is as strong as Israel's ever going to be on this issue.
Right now, we're witnessing some sort of unity in Israel, in the political elite of Israel. They are all supporting the Netanyahu administration. But in the aftermath of this conflict, how do you see the future of Netanyahu?
First of all, there is no unity in Israel right now. It's artificial. It's fake. Israel's lying to itself and to the world because Israel doesn't want the truth to come out about what happened on October 7th, the absolute failure, political failure, military failure. And they definitely don't want to talk about October 8th. That's the day that they really don't want to talk about because that's the day that this undisciplined mob of Israeli Defense Force poured back into these settlements and slaughtered the settlers that were there. I guarantee you that if they release the autopsies of all the bodies they've picked up, you will find that the majority of them, or even more than a majority, were killed by 5.56 millimeter rounds fired by Israel. There's enough eyewitness testimony that supports this. And Israel doesn't want to talk about this. Before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu was in a very precarious situation. He's a corrupt man charged with corruption. And if he was ever taken before a court of relevant jurisdiction, he would be found guilty and spend the rest of his life in prison. That's where he belongs. Many Israelis agree with this. But what Netanyahu has done is use this far right-wing Zionist coalition that he's built to rewrite Israeli basic law. So any notion of separate but equal branches of government has been eliminated because the Israeli judiciary is now controlled by the Israeli legislature that can remove a judge at any time through majority vote. So if a judge ever was to hear a case against Benjamin Netanyahu, that judge would no longer be the judge, and the judges would be known that if you want to be a judge, you won't hear a case about Benjamin Netanyahu. That's the way it is. Hundreds of thousands, millions of Israelis said, no, we refuse this. They were in the streets. They were demonstrating. Israel was on the verge of civil war. That's not me exaggerating. It's not hyperbole. That was a statement of the Israeli president, President Herzog, who said, we are on the verge of civil war. And it's not a theoretical civil war. We're talking about people fighting against each other, where the Likud and the Labor come together in combat in Israel, a civil war. That's where they were. None of those problems have gone away. Those issues still exist. But what's happening now is that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is afraid of the consequences of its actions. So it's created a unity government, bringing in Benny Gantz. But Benny Gantz is to blame. Nobody has clean hands here. They're all dirty. And they all know that if the Israeli public was ever fully informed about just how bad things were, that the government had fallen asleep on the job, the military is not very good, heads would roll. And so that's what's happening. There is no future for Benjamin Netanyahu. When this is done, he is done. That's just a statement of fact. He cannot stay on as the prime minister of Israel. He is a failure. He failed. All of his cabinet has to go. All the generals who were in charge have to go. I don't know how far down the chain of command you want to go, but there needs to be a complete purging of political and military leadership because of the failure that manifested itself on October 7th.